in your years of experience, what has been your favorite thing? Why do you love doing this?
I would say doing EMDR therapy with people and starting with a traumatic memory where it's like an 8 out of 10. It's so distressing to think about. They're crying, they're nervous, and then by the end of the session, they think about the worst part, and their body feels completely calm. They can tell themselves the truth about who they are, and then a day, a week, a month, a year later, they try to pull up that painful memory, and it still feels distant. It still feels further away, and they still feel calm. So I kind of feel like I get to see little miracles happen through this therapy in my office, which is pretty awesome.
Hi, my name is Shannon, and I have the privilege of being part of a foundation in town that we focus on kids. We're in the kid business. It's a sports center, but we have a responsibility for programming, community things. We're expanding what that looks like. And so we've founded a movement, a platform, a conversation, and we're calling it CoRelate because we've got to figure out how to relate with each other. So this is our second recording in our hopefully many recordings. So I have the privilege of speaking with Mark today, and I'll let you introduce yourself. But thank you so much for being here today, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Odland, and family moved up here in the middle of COVID. Wife and 4 kids, 16 down to age 5. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and my specialty is trauma counseling, in particular EMDR therapy. So I'm certified. I create online courses, train other therapists around the world in EMDR. It's very powerful. Do marriage counseling as well. The relationship stuff is so important. Still own a clinic in the Twin Cities in White Bear Lake. We have 15 employees and growing, thankfully. I have a solo practice where I focus on working with business leaders, and I'm licensed in several states and enjoying that as well. So I like to write books and create courses, and I'd love to use my creativity to find ways to help people, and whether it's my therapy clients or other therapists.
Kind of give you a little background on what CoRelate is and where it came from and why we're sitting here. I'm on a board of directors of trustees of Duluth Heritage, the Essentia Duluth Heritage Sports Center, and I'm on the foundation board. So our job is to make sure that the center is fiscally viable and for programming. So we meet. I've been with this amazing group of local business leaders and thought leaders and people who just have a passion for kids and citizenship and leadership, and it's just really an honor to be with these people. And we all know what happened 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, almost now 3.5 years ago.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. So we had a good chunk of time where we weren't meeting, and we all experienced what we experienced with COVID, and we finally got back to our first in-person meeting, and we got through all of our business of check this, check that. And at the end, Pat Francisco was like, okay, anybody have anything else? And I'm looking at there and I'm like going, I know the personal crud that was going on in my life because I'm a business owner and I'm a mom of 5 kids. And I just know all the shared trauma and all the everything that was going on. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like going, okay, I have something. And I'm like, I don't know about you guys, but there's just so much new pressure and just I'm no foreigner to pressure and stress and craziness and getting blindsided. Life just happens, right? But with this COVID thing, it was like we had nothing to gauge it against. Yeah. So my own kids at that time were 16 to 21, 22. And that's just the hardest time of life anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you throw COVID on top of that. And so I'm looking at my own kids and, a couple of them, one in particular, but a couple of them are, just struggling. And I found myself saying to myself, is this normal teenage angst?
Right.
Is this something that is COVID and it will just pass? Is this something I need to step in and address? Like, how do you know? Like, how do you know what you're looking at? And as a parent, you don't want to freak out on something and overreact, because then the thing that you're freaking out upon actually it facilitates.
Yep.
But just the insecurity and just the, I don't know what I'm looking at and I don't know how to address this. And I'm a single mom, unfortunately, but I've got a great family structure around me, but nobody knew. Like nobody's navigated this before. So that was the question that started this whole thing in the first place was, as a parent, how do we know what we're looking at? How do we know when to step in? How do we, we just don't know, because we've never walked this before. And you feel hopeless. You're like, I can see my kids struggling, but is this just normal? And they'll just kind of get over it. Because, you read that, don't Google, just, God, you Google stuff. And they're like, has your kid lost interest in things they used to do? Well, yeah, because they're home right now.
Right.
Like there's nothing, So literally you could check every box that either my kid is like ready to end it all, or it's just fine and they'll be fine next week and whatever. Like you didn't know. You didn't know. That was the question in that meeting. I was like, you guys, I'm struggling with this. And it was pretty amazing because everybody around that table, they were like, like me too.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, so then if this is our job, because we're a center for kids, we're in the kid business, what can we do about it? So we sat down and we kind of percolated this idea that, what if we had conversations? What if we had conversations and sought out people who may be able to help us with this understanding of what are we seeing? And even if we walked away realizing, man, we're not alone in this, but really wanting to walk away with some tangible understanding of just things that could help. So that's where this all started from. And then I came across you on LinkedIn. I'm like, wait, who's this guy? And he's in Duluth. So I tracked you down. And you were super gracious to sit and have a cup of coffee. But I would like everybody to know who you are and giving a little background, just how you got here and why you would even be willing to sit down with us.
Well, I'm happy to be here. It's fun to it's fun to do this. And I think part of what the connection is, I remember on LinkedIn, you had this little descriptor somewhere in your bio that said, does anyone else feel like we got a PhD or something during COVID? Crash course. Yeah. And I appreciated that because I felt like even with my job as a therapist, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist doing telehealth to a bunch of other states.
So unpack that a little bit, because what caught me on your LinkedIn was the modalities.
Yeah.
And then your specific solo practice to business owner. Just explain that just a little bit. I just want people to know a little bit more holistically what you do.
As a marriage and family therapist, I'm basically trained as a generalist. So I can work with anxiety or depression, marriage counseling, PTSD. But early in my career, I came across this therapy, EMDR, stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a really long acronym. But it's a trauma therapy that actually can heal PTSD. And they found along the way that it's helpful for so many other things, for things that bring people to therapy, right? Like stress, anxiety, phobias, depression. A lot of these things have their roots back in earlier painful experiences that haven't totally healed. And this therapy really gets at the heart of that. Early in my career, I discovered this. I got trained in it. I went on to become certified and then become one of those people who, a approved consultant who trains other people to become certified. So that's been kind of my specialty. And then also I have a background in ministry. And so a lot of clients will come to me looking to integrate that in some way, even if it's just asking these bigger questions about meaning and purpose, which I think we're all faced with, the last 3.5 years, right? So we're in the cities and everything's shut down. And all of a sudden my whole practice, I have to transition us to telehealth because whenever possible, we were supposed to work remotely.
Did you do any telehealth at that point?
Very little.
Okay.
Very little. Yeah. So it was kind of somehow I kind of saw the writing on the wall a couple of weeks before the shutdown. I just kind of saw what was happening and I called up Zoom before it was like a household name.
Should have bought stock in Zoom.
I know. And they had this HIPAA compliant business plan that worked out good for our team. So we transitioned them, and then our kids are in and out of school, mask, no mask, in school, out of school. And my wife, so she's a special ed teacher for over a decade, and now she's a wellness coach with our clinic.
I was going to say, introduce us real quick to your wife and your family.
Yeah, so my wife, Rachel,
Okay.
and then we've got 4 kids, 16 all the way down to 5.
Okay. So
So-
you in the throes of it too.
We're in the throes of it. So Brooke's our oldest. She's learning to drive, and then we have Oliver, our 12-year-old, and then Charlotte, our 9-year-old, and then our little Jack, who's 5. Yep. So, but Rachel and I actually met as camp counselors working in northern Minnesota during college, and so we've just always loved the woods and the water and nature. And we've always wondered, how are we going to end up in Duluth or somewhere up north? So here we are. Rachel decides to homeschool the kids for the first time ever, and then I'm working remotely now, running the clinic remotely. All of a sudden, nothing is like tying us down anymore. And of course, we have friends there, and it's hard. It's hard to move, and there's a grieving process. But it was exciting for us to kind of have a new chapter in our life up here. So we move up to Duluth, and no regrets. We're excited to be here.
It's something being around the lake, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
Like you cannot replicate Lake Superior.
it's amazing.
It is amazing.
It's always been my like happy place to imagine sitting on the beach and just seeing that blank canvas of the horizon line of Lake Superior.
The sun rises over Lake Superior, the moon rises.
Yeah.
Like literally, it's just therapy. I tell people, just get your coffee, sit out there in the courtyard, watch the sunrise. There you go.
Honestly, I feel like walking the beach was so therapeutic for us during COVID. My wife and I had so many tough talks about back to square one, back to how do we parent our kids through this? How do we get through this? I'm kind of a germaphobe, so COVID was like bad for me, even as a therapist. And my wife's like, I've delivered 4 children. I'm not worried about this as much as you are. Like, I've been through tough things already. And I'm like, okay, I could see that, but it's weird to think about those early few months. We didn't know how serious it was going to be.
Nobody knew. Yeah,
no
nobody
one knew.
Yeah.
No one knew. So there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty. And how do you deal with that responsibly without being over anxious? And how do you not let that spill over to your kids?
Okay, so okay, so what's going through my head is like you and your wife are trained in this. Like you're aware
Yeah,
of these
yeah.
things. So you're saying to yourself, how do I not overreact to this? I'm not thinking any of those things. I'm just like, how am I surviving? And I'm losing my mind when I see my kids doing this. Like I'm not stopping
Right.
to be thoughtful, to understand how these things are impactful, because it's just not the world or the profession I live in.
Right.
So I think you touched on something you said in the beginning. We didn't know, nobody knew.
Right.
And so I was running a business where I had a bunch of staff, and because we didn't know, all we knew is it just felt like this. This is how I describe it. Tell me if this was your experience too. It was like you heard this army of death was coming, and you didn't know when it was going to show up. But when it showed up, you just knew it was just going to overtake you, and you may or may not survive. Like it was just like there was nothing we could do to stop this army that was literally just going to float over us, and like it was just a matter of time. Like it's coming, the waves are coming, and just whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And so we were food and beverage, so we technically could stay open because we were deemed essential. And I'm like, is coffee essential? People are like, oh yes.
Yes.
So, but we lost everybody because they either just had to go home or a few people lived with their grandparents, and we didn't know. Like, we don't know what this is. And we're like, I can't have you be exposed to things and be living with your grandparents.
Right.
So like losing everybody, it was my own kids and just some family friends that came to help us. And this was the constant conversation. So like, I'm a business owner trying to run a
Right.
business, but I'm being mom not only to my own kids, but all these other kids. And you're trying to keep yourself sane and put together because somehow you have to lead these people. And I don't have any background.
Right.
I mean, I have mom background, which we all know is, partners, part therapist anyway, but,
Right.
but we were all at a deficiency. We didn't know. So my question is, we've experienced all this, but have we really processed through any of it?
Yeah.
As a culture, have we really
No.
processed through any of it?
It's a great question. And my suspicion is we haven't. All of a sudden things started to feel normal, quote unquote normal. Mm-hmm. Combined with everyone being kind of emotionally just over it. In some ways, like there came, I don't know where that point is in time where people like stop. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it. The fatigue of it all.
Yeah.
And it maybe felt good to get back into what felt like normal and to kind of just live life and stay busy.
Like we can't go back to the way it was because things have forever changed.
Right.
So then in your mind, if you're going to go back to something that felt normal, but it wasn't that way, and well, now there's that crisis of it's not the same. So, I mean, what did you see during this time? Like, because the original question was, how do we know what we're seeing? How do we know what we're seeing? Because like I said, you can Google, like, does my kid have depression? Is my kid, and like those things are just not real helpful because, I mean, I could read those things. I'd be like, well, yeah, I checked 10 of those boxes. Like you can overthink all those things too, So like, how do we have a rational ability to see what we're seeing? And maybe there's really no answer to that, but I'm just thinking just anything to help me, to help parents that are in the throes of this. Because when those kids are like 12, I keep thinking the kids like, 12 to 25, like it's just, that's the time where they're trying to figure out who they are. And that was through pandemic, or now is this considered post-pandemic? I don't know.
Yeah.
But just culturally, what are you seeing? What have you been seeing coming into your practice? What have you been seeing that is just practical things that could help parents? Because we're all asking these questions.
Yeah.
And we don't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
We just know we're struggling. And then if we don't know what questions to ask and we don't know who to ask,
right?
Because who you ask is also important.
It is. So. And, obviously I'm a big advocate of therapy.
Oh, yeah.
I think can be helpful for all of us. And it's a personal thing, not every therapist is the right fit for each person. And so I tell people, if you have a couple sessions with someone and you're just not clicking, it's okay to change. It's okay to change the person you're working with. Don't give up on therapy. Just make a shift.
So how do you know when it's not working, or how do you know when somebody's just maybe getting in your business the way they should? So describe when you kind of know it's a good fit or not a good fit.
I would say, for me, I think there's a sense of you feel like it tends to be two things. It tends to be you feel like they understand. You feel like they care. Maybe it's three things. But you feel like they're competent enough to help you move toward your goals, or even be able to help you define what those goals are. That's a collaborative process. Those first few sessions, like, why are you here? Where do you want to get to? How do we know when we're there? And how might we get there together?
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of caring people who maybe aren't able to kind of project a path forward. Sure. And there could be people who are really good about the goals, but they're not as empathetic as you might need, right? So, we're people as therapists, obviously, like doctors, everyone, we're just people with different skill sets and different personalities. And at the end of the day, I think you just kind of know it in your gut. You kind of leave feeling like, okay, like on one hand, it was comforting. On the other hand, they made me face some hard things maybe. And that was uncomfortable, but it feels like I'm making progress. Like it feels like I had to face that. Yeah. That was a hard question they asked me. But I needed to answer that question. I need to at least think about that question, right?
And with telehealth now, like there's some great resources that people can find. Like,
yeah, I think most therapists do telehealth now. So really you're only bound by state lines. So if a therapist is licensed here in Minnesota and they do telehealth, they could see you as long as you're a resident here. You could see any therapist. Okay. In Minnesota. Yeah.
So where are you licensed?
Well, now I'm licensed in Minnesota, Florida, Nevada, Indiana, South Dakota, Texas. Yeah, just a few.
Or is this something you specifically are going
I
after?
can be a little obsessive when I set my mind on a new goal. So I kind of, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because I'm focusing a lot on working with stressed out business owners, that's a smaller sample size to draw my clients from. So I wanted to kind of expand my reach of being able to reach those people who want to work with me.
So I want to focus on two things. One, I want to get some clarity on what to tell those parents when they see their kid seriously struggling.
Yeah.
Because kids, I mean, they morph with their personalities anyway. Something that they liked when they were 5 or 6, they may not like anymore, or you know what? So those changes are just naturally occurring anyway. But I think a parent knows. I think they know when their kid is just really struggling, and to get a kid to talk sometimes is nearly impossible. So I want to touch on that, and maybe we'll just sit there for a little bit, and then I want to move on to the business thing too. So,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting because especially in those teenage years, it seems like they're pushing us away sometimes, and
sometimes. Boy, what do you mean sometimes? Yeah.
Depends on the kid, but more often than not, right?
Yeah, I'm like, the kids make it very clear. They don't want anything, like, don't talk to me, whatever.
Well, it's developmentally appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Because they're having to differentiate themselves apart from their parents and figure out who they are as a person. And sometimes that means just like pushing away the closest person to them.
Yeah.
Which often
the sky is blue. No, it's not.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All
yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah. So I think one thing I would say to parents is just because a kid says I don't want to talk or I'm busy, that doesn't mean like, oh, I guess I can't do anything now. It's like, yeah, respect their space, but not that much. Like you can dig in there a little bit. You can, they still, even if they don't want to have those conversations with you, they still need you.
Okay. So how? That's my question, because you nailed it right there.
Yeah.
Because the big cultural message is, respect the person, so when your kid makes it very clear, like, I'm giving you the stiff arm, it's like, well, I'm not going to push my way in, because if I push my way in, it's just I'm going to get more of that. It's going to go worse. They're not listening. They're going to make their own decisions. They're going to find their own way, whatever. So like, you need to have those conversations, but yet you can't push it. So how do you do that? How do you still connect and how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a place where knowing your kid and creativity might come in a little bit. Like, say, you could have a kid who's like, I can't believe they play video games that much. I'm so sick of them being on their Xbox or whatever. Counterintuitive, but you could be like, hey, I know this sounds weird, but like, can you teach me how to play? And now you're playing it with them, and 90% of it's playing the game. 10% of it is a little bit of a conversation. Like, okay, let's take the 10%. Let's build on that.
So what I hear you saying is just find some way literally just to connect. It's not about, because as a parent, we're like, we want you to hear our words of wisdom and I want to teach you something. And you're saying just kind of put that aside for the initial, like, just, you got to find some common ground to connect.
Sometimes. Yeah. And I'm not saying you have to be like their best friend and give up your role as a parent either, but I feel like, yeah, there is, you kind of got to be creative. Maybe it's taking them out for lunch, a different environment that's outside the house where you get in your patterns and, feistiness. It's like, hey, what's your favorite restaurant? Let me take you out to lunch. Hey, I promise, only 10 minutes of our time I'm going to talk to you about that thing you don't want to talk about.
And when kid just says no, when they say no to every invitation, what do you do at that point? Hey, can we sit down and play video games? No. Hey, can I take you to lunch? No. Hey, let's take a day trip somewhere. No.
Yeah, I mean, I think if at all possible, to use not a heavy-handed approach, but I also think that there does come a point where, as the parent, like let's flip it. Say they didn't have an emotional wound that was threatening to derail their life, but say it was a physical wound, right? So they're playing video games and you see they have this huge gash like on their leg and it's just bleeding. If you said, honey, your leg's bleeding, it looks kind of serious. Like, I'm really concerned about you. Get out of my room. Like, you probably wouldn't just like let it bleed, right? You'd probably like, no, you get right here, right now. We need to bandage that up.
Yeah.
Or
You're bleeding on my carpet.
You're bleeding on the carpet. or if worse comes to worse, you call the ambulance.
Right.
So like, yeah, it's not great when it gets to that point where you have to use your leverage. But I do remind parents that you do have leverage. Like, unless the kid is somehow that has this awesome job where they're paying for everything.
Okay, but what is that leverage? Okay, so now we're getting there.
We're
getting there. We're getting there because I've experienced some of this.
I bet.
Where they're too old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're too old where like they do maybe own their own car. They are paying for their own, like they do those things. They have those things. So the question is, if it's not a physical wound, if we're talking emotional, mental, you can't see that.
Right.
You can only see the effects of it.
Right.
So how do you know what you're seeing is what you're seeing? Because my mind, I got the classic mom mind, like, I can't find my kid. Oh my gosh, they're in a ditch somewhere. They've rolled their car and they're like, no, they just turned their phone off because they were at a movie. Like,
right.
Our imaginations can go crazy and we can always think the worst. So how do we know when they're at a crisis of emotional or, mental, when you do need to leverage and step in? So how do you know and what do you do? Because, I had an incident where I couldn't get a kid out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? I don't know what to do. Do you call the police? Do you call, you can't make them go get a trauma assessment. You can't make them, what are you going to physically go pick them up out of bed? You're going to,
Right.
So
that's tough.
Therein lies the issue.
That's really tough. And as we learn a lot in our education as therapists, and I'm not as far along as you, right? So there are things about these situations where you maybe are more of an expert than I am.
And you're a therapist dad. I was the mom. That's like, what am I doing?
I think the reality is it's hard. There isn't always the one right answer. But when it does come to leverage, it's like if they're staying in your house, if you're buying their groceries, if you're paying for their phone, if you're paying for anything, you hate to feel like you have to parent your 18-year-old like a 10-year-old. But there could be cases where maybe it has to happen. Mm-hmm.
So that right there, when your kid needs some stronger intervention.
Yep.
How do you do that? Like practically, how do you do that?
Yeah. It is hard. It is a hard question because the older you get, I feel like the less leverage you have.
Well, and also you don't want to come across like I'm just powering up on you.
Right, because then they resent it or they're frustrated. They feel like you don't get it. I guess what I would say is that if you're a parent and you feel like, what leverage, if any, do I have left? And how serious is the situation that I feel like I'm dealing with? So there's an assessment there.
And how do you do that?
To pick your battles.
That's what was going through my head. Like, pick my battles. Do I want, when do you pull the fire alarm? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it feels emotionally like this is a 5-alarm fire and I need to pull, but is it? Because once you pull that, there's no going back.
Right.
So, and I'm sure there's no hard and fast answer, but just what you've seen, anything you could just help us as parents just kind of clue into some of that.
Okay, well, here's one thing. And this is kind of an art, I guess, in a way, but you can look it up on YouTube or something and practice it. I do this all the time with couples, but it works really good with kids too. And it's basic, reflective listening skills. And I think you've even done some of that in our podcast. Like someone says something, instead of okay, now I'm gonna get my 2 cents in. It's like saying, okay, I think I hear you saying this. Am I tracking with you? Do I understand right? And then most people don't ever get that satisfaction of someone actually truly heard me. Mm. And so to hear someone reflecting back with similar language, okay, so I think I hear you saying that all your friends play video games at, 8 hours a day and you only play 4 hours a day. So it's actually not as bad as you think it is. So that's interesting because as a parent, you might be thinking, oh, you have to bite your tongue. Right? Because it's a timing issue. What you have to say as a parent still matters. but now is not the timing to like jab. Now is like, okay, I want them to feel like they've been heard.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the timing is right, you can say, I think I do understand where you're coming from the best I can as your mom or dad. Would you be willing to hear me out?
So not everything needs to be said at that time.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other rule of thumb is when it is your turn to speak, keep it short. Because you know how that can go. Like you can end up go on a monologue for 5 minutes.
And they've heard nothing.
They've heard nothing, especially because it comes out as what they're hearing is, I'm a bad kid. I failed. I'm not good enough. I'm controlled. I'm fill in the blank.
And talking about the issue at hand, because we get very historical.
Yeah. Well, and that comes back to my training with the trauma therapy, right? Is all it takes is the same feeling, a feeling of helplessness, a feeling of being out of control, a feeling of being inadequate. And if we have experiences in our past that haven't healed and been fully processed, then guess what? This situation about the video games actually dredges up all the emotional weight of these other experiences where you felt that way for both the kid and the parent. And now what are you even fighting about? It's like you're arguing about this plus all these other things that happened. And how do you find resolution through that? It's too overwhelming.
So that leads my mind to think we've all experienced that in COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And if we haven't collectively and individually dealt with this,
right,
we just got all that sitting there.
It's sitting there. And where it's sitting is in these amazing supercomputer brains that we have that record just about everything. And if we don't process, if we don't talk about it, if we don't have a dream about it, if we don't journal, if we don't do therapy, if we don't, fill in the blank, find some way to kind of like get it out of our head.
Process it and process through it. Yeah.
Do art. If some way to process it, it gets stuck. And if the brain records it as a traumatic experience, it kind of gets stuck in the wrong place. And it gets stuck in the kind of place where a future situation that feels a little bit the same will double click that file and open up the past stuff along with the present stuff. And so if you've ever been in a relationship where you're like, wow, it seems like they just had a really out of proportion response.
Yeah.
Including ourselves.
Yeah. Like that emotional response didn't fit that.
It didn't fit
what happened there. Like that was way overreactive.
But if you could line up on a piece of paper, without even knowing it, I just triggered this trauma and this trauma and this trauma plus this thing we're talking about. Oh, actually it matches just right compared to all this stuff that's like in the background, right? And so I think not that there's a one size fit all, but I think there's something about if we have unprocessed, unhealed experiences, like a lot of things that happen in COVID, one way or another, as humans, we really do need to process those things. And if we don't, then what we end up doing is being oversensitive about certain situations and certain emotions, or we numb out in order to have to avoid those situations and emotions. And so what do? We drink more, we watch more movies, we eat more, we scroll through our phone more, like we're all susceptible. And then you got these billion-dollar companies
that are profiting off.
We're hiring therapists to like figure out how can we get this person addicted. It's like,
I heard somebody say once that either somebody's selling you a product or you are the product. Sure, shoot, and the next day I'm going to start getting ads for EMDR therapy because like they just know, and it's scary. And like us as parents or people who have lived pre-internet, we know this, and that hands down has been the number one battle with my kids is technology.
Yeah,
hands down. So this is super helpful. Understanding how parents can just start creating maybe some touch points, even just starting it.
If it's small, even. Right.
So what happens when your kid is like, won't come out of the room, won't talk to you, literally the sound of your voice, they're just like, nope. Like when they have what it feels like cross that threshold of like, there's just no way to connect here. Like, is this hormonal? They're having, just let them get through 3 days and they'll, because the thought, whether it's true or perceived or a lie or whatever, is just give it a little bit more time and maybe things will change or settle in. Because this is true sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it is.
But how do you know when that's not going to happen?
Right. And even though, it's not necessarily helpful to like Google every mental health disorder and feel like we have it or our kids have it.
Right.
There can be something objective or a little helpful about what's a standard, like look up a common, like very simple depression or anxiety checklist.
Right.
And then be like, okay, I'm not going to like go down the rabbit hole of every last thing, but it's like, is my kid checking out all this stuff for depression? And if the answer is yes, then maybe it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to like force all these hard conversations right now, but maybe I say, hey, I know you don't like this. I love you. It's not healthy to stay in here all day. I'll still pay for your phone, but we're going to go for one walk. We're going to go for one walk today. And you don't have to talk if you don't want to, but we're going to get outside and we're going to get some fresh air for 15 minutes.
So what's your suggestion when you know your child or loved one needs to talk to a third party person? How would you go about that conversation to have the best option of cooperation for them to do that?
Yeah, I think one thought is leading by example. So normalizing, like people don't think twice about going to the doctor for a sore throat or to get a physical. That's normal. It doesn't mean something's like really wrong with you or broken or whatever, all this stigma. And, one approach would be to say, hey, you know what? The last 3 years have been really hard for a lot of reasons. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I didn't process and it's stuck inside of me. And I want to be the best mom, the best dad that I can be to you. I want to be the best business owner. I want to be a good friend. And I feel like it's going to hold me back if I don't do this. And so just like it's good to go to the gym, it's good to find a way to process. And you can to tell the 16-year-old, so I found a therapist the other day. I had my first session. It went really good. It was kind of, it's kind of hard to talk about stuff and share secrets with a stranger and all this, but you know what? I feel like this is good. And then maybe that's the end of the conversation. Maybe you don't say, now you have to get one, but like maybe,
don't use all the words at once.
Right. So this metaphor of planting seeds.
Yeah.
Planting seeds and finding a way to let them know that you unconditionally love them. Right. Like that's the baseline. And that you're not going to be crazy pushy or mean, but you are going to fight for them imperfectly, right? As parents, we're there's no perfect manual for how to do this, right?
So fighting for them, not fighting them.
There you go.
And that's a big distinction.
Yeah.
Because the kid feels like you're fighting them.
Right. And kids can sense hypocrisy too.
Oh yeah.
It was so high, right? Like their meter for detecting BS is like off the charts. And so that like kind of this both and of I'm your parent and I still pay the bills and you're still in my house. And there's certain basic expectations that come with living here. And I don't have it all figured out. And I'm a human being just like you. And I've got to work on my stuff. And so it ends up being a conversation about how do we not be too heavy-handed, but are there enough boundaries in the family, enough structure, enough basic expectation around certain things that we don't inadvertently enable them. So that's a whole nother conversation, but the idea of being codependent or enabling people that we love.
You love your kids so much that because we are doing this imperfectly and because we're not trained therapists and we've never walked this before, especially if it's like your oldest kid or whatever.
Right.
Your biggest fear is like, I'm going to accidentally do something that's going to trigger this forever something that they just plant this in their head and they just decide to cut ties and, because you don't want that. You don't want to accidentally put this wedge where, because you know what, you have people that you're like, oh, I haven't talked to my mom in 40 years.
Right.
Or I haven't, and I think we just have to wrestle that down that, you know what, I love this person. I want the best for this person. And you know what, I guess if something like that happens, it happens.
Right.
But I can't shy away from trying to engage and fight for this person, you know?
Well, that's right. And I think what I tell people sometimes in counseling, when it has to do with, like, for example, a grown adult who still struggles with dealing with one of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll ask them questions like, okay, when you're on the phone with them, how do you feel?
Yeah, like you're 12.
Like you're 12,
Yeah.
right? It's like you feel like, and what is that about?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It might be about, well, Dad always says this thing that makes me feel guilty, like I don't know what I'm doing, and da 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 da. And every time I see the caller ID that Dad's calling, I get this feeling of like avoidance. Like I love him, but I feel bad after I talk to him. So like to be able to crack through that, and even to be able to empower someone to have a hard conversation and say, Dad or son, like, but like, yeah, in this situation, it's thinking as parents how that can feel on the other side, right? With our own parents, sometimes things can be complicated.
Yeah.
And it's a hard conversation to have, to say, Dad, I love you very much, and I want to have great phone conversations with you, and I want to have fun on the holidays. And when you say these things, it makes me feel guilty, and I kind of don't want to talk. I kind of don't want to pick up the phone. It would mean a lot to me if you could just not say that, not critique my parenting, whatever it is, right? And they're imperfect. Old habits die hard, so there's got to be some grace there. But if you can be assertive enough to set a boundary and then to lovingly be able to call it out in real time if it happens 2 months later, Dad, I love you. You did it again just now. Did you know you did it? You just said that thing. Oh, and then if they're sorry, be like, it's all right. Just
Progress.
keep working on it.
Yeah.
I've got stuff to work on too.
Yeah.
You know, so we're all human. We're all imperfect. How do we be honest and truthful and yet loving? And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Because you're going to trip over people's unhealed things.
Yeah.
So that word boundaries is interesting that you use that, because I've learned to appreciate that as I'm getting older. But it's also a catchphrase that I just feel like people have weaponized like crazy.
It's true.
Because a boundary is not, I'm going to set up these rules for our relationship, and if you don't comply, I'm going to punish you.
Right.
No, the boundary is I have complete control, because like if this is what I need and you don't comply, I just disengage. Like I just, it's not getting you to comply. It's not forcing compliance on your side.
No, it's like saying whatever this person does or doesn't do, here's what I can live with,
right?
And how I can be okay in my own skin. Like how can I?
And that can change too, because
change.
like in a relationship, there's times where you can be totally fine and tolerate certain things during some seasons, and you just can't. And being self-aware of that, because I think like I just keep thinking of myself over the last 3.5 years. Well, 2 decades, but that's another story. But just we're talking COVID.
Yeah.
Just how much I have been drained in some aspects, and it's not until I stop and actually think about it that I'm like, wow, I don't have what I used to have over there. But guess what? My muscles over here are way stronger.
Right.
So getting back to people like having therapy or having somebody that can really just allow them to verbally process through things and be skilled at asking good questions. And we've been so isolated. And so
that's right.
So, having conversations like, our first go round of this was taking the risk and taking the initiative to find community.
Right.
Healthy community, not an echo chamber community, but like healthy community where people will, lovingly ask you the hard questions, get you to think critically, get you to realize that if you're not transforming these things in your own life, you're transferring them to everybody around you, And so it's hard work, but it's so good.
It is. But yeah, and I think, I don't know how you instill this in your kids. I mean, I guess it's through repetition and for ourselves as well. But there's this sense that if you seek only comfort, then it leads to pain down the road. Yes. Right. But if you're willing to embrace discomfort now in certain areas of your life and kind of like, okay, I'm going to choose this, bring it on, then there can be more comfort down the road, the delayed gratification. Yeah. Right. And even therapists can fall into the trap of feeling like, our only job is to make someone feel completely comfortable and just agree with everything they say. Mm-hmm. And it might feel good at the time, but when the person leaves the therapy office and goes back to their house, it's like, was there change? Right? Because these healing trauma, for example, involves opening up an emotional wound. Mm-hmm. And initially that hurts. Mm-hmm. It's hard to face. You'd rather avoid it. But then it actually gets healed.
So don't you think that comes back to just the culture we've lived in where all these billion-dollar corporations are making their money off of communicating to us that we just have to do what feels good? Like we're training ourselves to be like dopamine, feel good, be in comfort.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, like it's totally where I'm aging myself now. Uh-huh. Back in the day, when we didn't have the ability to just take ourselves out of an uncomfortable situation. We couldn't just leave that school or leave that class or leave that team or leave, we couldn't do that. Like you had to face, and in facing those uncomfortable things or whatever, and you get to the other side, you're like, oh, I survived, I'm fine, consciously, unconsciously. But like now, if you don't like a situation, you can opt out.
Right.
Like we have every opportunity to opt out of anything that's uncomfortable. And it's actually crippling us, I think, as a society. And my middle child, my third son, I think he was probably 20. He says to me one day, he was like, comfort's just not your friend. And I was like,
interesting.
Right. I'm like, I never said that, but it's true. And I was like, where are you getting that from? And I'm like, yes, so little redeeming moment, but
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, and it also is a mindset of life, right? Like there are things in life that can truly victimize us.
Yeah. Legitimately. And they're valid.
And they're valid, right? But if we take on that feeling as part of our identity, then it feels like we're waiting for things to happen to us.
Yeah.
Right. And we're at the mercy of all these things we can't control.
Yeah.
And so to be able to do the paradoxical thing and the both and, these legitimate things really happen to me, and that's real and that's painful. But I can choose this path to face hard things, to overcome, to get the healing I need. Right. And to know that there can be bright things ahead. I mean, that's the flip side. There's in the kind of the treatment of PTSD world, there's something called the post-traumatic growth inventory. And it's kind of like this checklist of like, here are all the good things that can happen after trauma too. It can make us stronger. It can make us more grateful. It can make it, not always, but it can. And so that's the hope. Right?
Yeah, because trauma is not like a death sentence, like, no. Done. You are now damaged for life.
No, not at all. And it really can heal. Some people think that you have it for life, you're stuck with it. You can only medicate yourself to numb it down. And they don't know that there are treatments out there that really can help you process things fully. And and feel more hopeful about life, feel lighter, feel more peaceful, feel like you're not carrying the heavy weights. Right?
Yeah. We want to make sure we have some takeaways with this because we've talked about a lot of things, which has been super valuable. And so the things that have been going through my head is like, I can just, from my own experience, my youngest child got to a point where just very dark, depressed, like I felt completely helpless. And it got to the point where I just had to wrestle down in myself that we're at crisis right now. And I need to do whatever I can just to keep her alive and just to be safe. And what I learned during that, it was horrible.
Yeah.
To be like, I have to resign myself to the fact that like, if I lose my child, I lose my child. But I love her so much and I care about her that I'll do anything at this point. And it's not about like the damage to the relationship. It's about survival.
Right.
And I learned a big lesson with her that I wish I would have known earlier. Whereas like, okay, I don't care what you think about me right now. I don't care. Like if you never talk to me again in my life, I need to make sure you're safe.
Right.
And so these things that I'm doing right now is because as an adult, this is what I determine for you to be safe.
Right.
And what you talked about that, even though when they're not listening or whatever, and it was hard, like, it was hard.
Yeah.
But those words were something that I think this generation understands safe. And I didn't realize that was kind of the key phrase. Like, I need to make sure you're safe.
Right.
Like they understood that. How can
you argue with that?
Right,
it's
right.
like,
But
you
probably
can.
they can argue. They can fight. They
You
can
can find
argue.
a way,
Yeah,
but-
yeah. But when they knew that my goal was, I wanted to make sure they were safe. That changed everything. That really changed everything. And I know every situation's different, but that really changed everything. And it allowed for a baseline connection to happen where we could start to move forward.
Yeah.
And I mean, my daughter, she's thriving now. She's doing great. But the scariness and the fear and it's overwhelming, and that's what prompted a lot of this initial conversation was, what do you do at that point? So if you could just run down for us, maybe just some quick takeaways of just, kind of the high level of what we've been through, just the quick things we can do to keep connection, if there's connection there. And when we see that connection is completely gone, what do you do in a crisis moment?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so kind of recapping it all, we've been through this crazy experience of COVID, not to mention racial tension, crazy stuff in the world, political tension,
yeah.
and then throw on top of it all the regular life traumas and stress that would have happened to people anyway.
Yeah.
Those experiences can get stuck, and they lead to being over emotional, oversensitive, or avoidant, wanting to numb out. And that really changes how we go through the world when we're impacted like that. And so finding somehow, some way to process through things that are hard. When the kids are younger, that's like the ideal time because we have the most influence, the most leverage, more connection points, as you said.
Yeah, and they still like you.
They still like you.
Let's go to McDonald's. Okay.
You can bribe them.
Yeah.
Guess what? After every therapy session, we get you a ice cream. I mean, I don't know. That's probably bad parenting, but it came into my mind, right?
Okay.
That, but you're weighing these things, right?
Yeah.
Pros and cons, the benefit of getting this versus, right? So letting them know that you love them no matter what.
Yeah.
As they get older and want more freedom, it becomes more about putting the power on them and more about what, if I have to, I will. Like you said, there comes a tipping point where you might have to really fight for them and to make sure they're safe. I'd like to think that there's people that are listening that maybe aren't at that point yet, and maybe there's a window
Yes.
where there's more connection points.
Yes.
And those might be hard too. It might be like, if this doesn't happen, I love you. And I know you don't agree with me, but I'm taking the phone away. Or, do you tell the star athlete that, they can't, you can't go to your game? What would the neighbors think? I mean, sometimes it comes to that where you just have to be like, there are things I can take away, and I will if I have to. Right. And
because over here is more important.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, we want our kids to be thriving, like you said. We want them to be able to have healthy relationships, and we want them to be resilient enough to face the challenges of the world. Right. And like so many things, it's a tension point between, again, comfort and challenge. We want our kids to feel safe and comfortable and know that they're loved. And we want them to have enough experiences bumping up against things in life where they build confidence. I can handle this. I can do this. That was hard, but look what it led to, right? As cliche as it sounds, like this trauma or this door slammed in my face leads to this other unexpected opportunity or door that opens down the road.
Right on.
Right? And then I guess a really practical takeaway would just be thinking about how we communicate with our kids. How can we actually force ourselves to be interested in what they're interested in, as painful as it is sometimes?
Yeah.
Make them feel like
I really don't like Fortnite, but
yeah. You could have a Fortnite Halloween costume that you wear as the mom, just to.
Oh goodness, sure. Cal's like, please no, just no.
No, but find a way to enter into their world. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah.
Plant the seeds, connection points. Let them know that you might embarrass them, but they're gonna know they're loved.
Yeah.
Right, and there's space there to. Go from there. So
and that we don't have to use all the words all the time.
No,
That was a big one.
that was a good takeaway.
That was a big
yeah.
one that
The
stuck
timing,
out to me.
the timing of things are so important.
Yeah.
And the things that we wouldn't want to do with our friendships, like if you interrupted your friend every other second or you made them feel bad about it's like, no, they're not going to have coffee with you next week. Right. The same with our kids. They're just going to want to avoid us if there isn't a basic like respect there. And it's hard. It's a messy process. It's hard.
Because we mean well as parents.
Yeah.
Because like we have all these years and all this wisdom and all this, so we mean well, but we don't realize it's counterproductive when we use all the words. So
it can be
timing.
That's
a good word.
And you can make deals. You make deals. You know what? I've got all sorts of things I want to say right now. I don't think you want to hear it, do you? No. Okay. But I'm going to take you out for lunch next week, and for like 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you, what do you think? You can get your favorite hamburger. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you can bribe. You can if you have to, right?
Teenage boys, that works.
Food. Hard to go wrong with food.
Hard
right?
to go wrong with food. So, wow. Thank you a ton. This has been a super valuable conversation, and just the fact that you would give us your time, give us your space. I really hope that this conversation, at the very least, makes some people just feel like they're just not alone.
Oh. No.
And at the most, just they'd be like, that one little takeaway, like, I'm just going to try that. But there's so much. We're going to put some resources on our website and connecting to our social stuff of just links that people can go to find telehealth.
Yeah.
We'll put your stuff on there, obviously. But the day and age now, I think anybody who wants therapy can get it.
Yeah.
There's a way to find it.
I think so.
So, yeah. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Shannon.
All right.
It was great. It was fun.
We'll do round 2 sometime.